So we're going to do a floor framing plan. So if you want a reminder of what a floor framing plan looks like, this is the one that was on my PowerPoint. This is kind of a combination roof. So like that's a low roof, that's a low roof, and then this is the second floor framing plan. Um, so just a couple things to point out, and I'm going to actually pick on the two guys that are who used to be carpenters or still are carpenters to see what they've done in the field. So we're going to do a floor framing plan that's not TGIs and LVLs. This is the old school one where everything's made up of 2x4s, but or not 2x4s, 2x lumber. But if you use 2x lumber, remember I told you a lot of times on TGIs, you can run them continuous across the beam. Well, if you're using 2x lumber, you can't get them really long and straight. So if like you typically have to overlap them at the beam. So let me pull up something I've got on Blackboard here. So let's get this bigger and bigger, 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 bigger. Okay. So this is showing a 2-ply beam. On the assignment, we're going to have a 3-ply beam. And what the question is with you're using sticks that can't be continuous, like floor joists that can't be continuous over the beam, do you overlap them or butt them? So this kind of goes into more detail, and you can read the whole word for word on your own. But the simplest is overlapping them, which is what I typically saw on the job sites, where you overlap them, you nail them together, um, and then the other way of doing it is butting them with like a splice block. But then the nailing connection gets a little bit more complicated. And they said the only reason you typically would go with butting them together is like if you were doing a deck outside and you wanted all those screws to be in a line, through the deck boards into the floor joist. Do you guys agree with that, that overlapping is typically what's done in that condition? Okay. The next, so that's that. That's how do I close this out? I think I go there. Okay. So let's go in and look at the assignment I'm giving you. Oh, so then the other thing, I just want to show you back on this floor framing plan. So I was using wood eye joists, but my engineer told me that this span was so big that I couldn't have it continuous across the beam below. So he wanted me to even overlap the wood eye joists there. And so let me zoom in a little bit to show you what that looks like on plan. So I'm drawing this in AutoCAD, and each one of these lines stands for a framing member. I did not model it in 3D. I did not draw, 4 lines for each little rectangle of a framing member. It's not a picture, it's a diagram. So keep this in mind. It's not a picture, it's a diagram to show the framing. So this was all the masonry on the outside of that house, but this was my outside wall. And you'll notice that when my floor joists come out, they go to the outside of the outside wall. They don't stop before they hit the wall because they actually do sit on the plates for the outside wall. They do go to the outside of the outside wall. Okay, and you've noticed this in your book where he's got you put those floor joists, the floors in, the floors extend out in because it's platform framing. Let me see if I can get my new fancy toy to work here. It's platform framing. So if this is a section, we've got our top plates, and then we've got our rim joist, and that floor joist goes to the outside. If this is out and this is in, it goes to the outside of that wall, not the inside of the wall. And it's the same thing down at the foundation here. I've got my plate here, and this is my rim joist. Those floor joists go underneath that wall there. So let's go ahead and erase all that. Now, the next thing I want to talk about with the people from the real world is shown on, oops, I gotta get back to real things here. Okay, is shown on the assignment. which is, so I'm going to give you the, so if I look at this assignment, I'm giving you a Revit file and I'm giving you an AutoCAD file. You do not have to do both. You can pick one or the other. This is the assignment. So we're going to pretend that like I'm your boss and let's get this bigger too. I'm your boss and I give you a Revit file or an AutoCAD file. And I say, I designed this plan for the Smith residence last night. I need the framing plan finished this afternoon by the time I get back from my yoga class. So you can use either software. The drawing files include examples of how to draw floor joists, dropped and flush beams, double headers, double trimmers, columns, and joist hangers. These examples that I put on the files are not in the correct locations and should not be left there for the finished drawing. So let me just show you the two different files. So here's the AutoCAD file. So what you cannot change are, you notice that layer is locked, my foundation wall layer. You can't change the plan of the house because your boss designed the house and you're just working on the foundation plan. So that foundation has to stay. So you cannot change the location of the stairs because there's another AutoCAD file that shows the first floor plan. So I've got that on a locked layer. So you'll notice when I draw these example floor joists, they run out to the outside of the foundation wall. They do not stop at the inside of the foundation wall because why? They would fall down because there's nothing to hold them up. So we run them through to the outside of the foundation wall. Now, what I want to ask the people in the real world about is when you have a floor joist that's running parallel to, these are going through the wall, these are parallel to the wall. Did you guys ever put blocking underneath between the rim joist and that first floor joist, or did you just never do that? Because the book shows me sometimes they put blocking there to kind of stabilize that. You did put, yes, yes, yeah. You did. Did you ever put blocking in there? Let me show you a better diagram that explains what I'm talking about. Where is that? Oh yeah, that's under Valen's book. So these, when I say read, this is like for further information, and I apologize for the crappy scan that I had to do because I don't have a e-copy of this. So this shows like joist spacing and subfloor. This shows like how you do a build-up beam, like which is what we're doing in this assignment. We're taking 2x12s or whatever I'm going to say on the assignment, and we're nailing them together. When I talked about a flitch plate earlier on, you might have wondered what the heck a flitch plate is. A flitch plate is when you actually sandwich a piece of steel between the two pieces of wood to make like a steel sandwich. And it's much stronger. And then the lumber has also a nailing surface. So, you can nail the wood to that beam. So again, for further, you're not being tested on this. So this is what I was just talking about, whether you overlap your joists or you butt them. No, I'm not going to require you to draw all these pieces of wood and blocking. But if you're interested in drawing your joists overlapping the beam, that would be fine too. The carpenter is typically going to do what they want to do, that as long as it meets code. You don't really have to draw it because they don't. We're assuming the carpenters that are building our projects have like built houses before, and we don't have to show them exactly, like every stick that if they're going to splice them together and butt them, that they have to put that other piece in there. This is the one I was asking about. When we have our floor joists running this way, in and out of the page, and there'll be another joist here. Do you ever put in a piece of blocking going left to right to stabilize that where the bearing wall's coming in? I've seen it both ways. You're saying you did, all the time you did it? 2 feet on center, you did blocking? Did you do blocking? 32 on center, okay. But that's pretty standard in your, okay. Now, do I require you to draw that on the floor framing plan? No, I don't. Now, if you want to, you could put a note in there that, blocking between rim joist and first, floor joist. Um, so I just wanted to kind of uh, get real carpenter's opinion on that. Because I have seen projects where they didn't do that. I don't know, is that required by code, do you think, or is it just standard practice? 32 inches is required by code? Okay. So I guess I got fooled there. Okay, so now let's go back to so the white lines on the AutoCAD file are our floor joists. So I went through and labeled them. I'm not expecting you to label every stick. You're going to have to decide what to label. Like, so for example, if we're going to need double trimmer joists and double header joists at the stair opening. This opening doesn't have to stay there. I was just showing you how that gets drawn and labeled. These little C shapes are those metal joist hangers. Okay, so this is all flush. It's up in the same level as the floor. They just double the pieces of wood for our floor joists at the openings. And if you look back on my PowerPoint, I talked about that. So this is what the single floor joist looks like. This is what two floor joists next to each other. The little C is a joist hanger. The red circle is a steel column. If you do a dropped beam, the drop beams are on this assignment are made of 3 2x12s, and I just had you do them on a different structural layer in AutoCAD. And I'm not requiring you to print this thing out to scale. I'm not requiring you to get your sheet set up. You're just going to give me the AutoCAD file back. Okay. And then if it's a dropped beam on my AutoCAD file, I just having you draw a rectangle. And then you can see if it's, I'm sorry, a flush beam. And if you have a flush beam, you have to have a joist hanger every time a joist comes into it. Okay, so even though that dropped beam is 3 2x12s, I'm not having you draw 3 lines in there. It's kind of like, again, a diagram, just to show that when I print this out, the way my printing is set up, yellow would be super dark, and that would show as a dark line. Okay, so that's if you want to use AutoCAD. Now, if you want to use Revit, I've got it set up in Revit. Same exact thing. Now you'll notice I went through, and we haven't talked about pinned, but anytime I click on something and I see a pin, that won't let you erase it or move it. Okay, so I've got that all pinned so you can't accidentally, you can erase it if you mess with it enough and you unpin it, but I've got the walls pinned and the stair pin because those are fixed. In Revit, we're just going to use annotation lines. And then I'm using a different line type. So the joists are medium lines and the beams I'm using center line. And I've got the same thing. I've got my joist hangers drawn as a detail group. I've got my structural columns in there. So this is how you draw the things. That does not mean your beam line needs to be here. That does not mean there needs to be an opening here. These are the things you're going to do, and you're going to draw every stick for a framing plan for this floor plan. So now let's go in and look at the assignment again. And I'm just going to pull it up so I can, floor framing plan. Okay, let's get it bigger for you. Okay, so our floor joists are going to be 2x12 spruce pine fir #2 at 16 on center. So those floor joists are going to be drawn every joist at 16 inches on center. Now, does that mean that if it doesn't work out, the spacing works out at the end where it's either going to be an 8-inch spacing or a 24-inch spacing? What do we do in that case? At the end, because unless I did my house plan at a 16-inch module, I'm going to have some spacing somewhere on the plan that's somewhere off of 16. So if I'm telling you 16 on center maximum, 16 on center, Can I just arbitrarily make them go 24 inches on center on that last one? No, I can't because they're sized for 16. I can make them go less, but not more. Okay. Um, and they can span 16 feet maximum. So if I look at this plan here, there's going to be a need to be a beam. Now I'm giving you a little bit of a hint here. The logical way to frame this is with floor joists going up and down on the screen and some sort of beam line somewhere in the middle of the house. Okay. So when you look at this, it's typically going to be framed this way, but this dimension is bigger than 16 feet. So I'm going to need a beam line running across horizontally. And when I do that, you have to decide whether I'm going to need another beam line out at these bays. So I'm giving you some hints here. I don't know why I'm doing that. I used to just say, I'm at yoga. I'm not answering any questions. You figure it out. But I'm giving you some hints. Okay. So now let's go in and look at the assignment one more time here. The beams are 3 2x12s, and those beams can span 12 feet maximum. Beams should be dropped, not flush, if possible. And I'm doing that because it's preferable to run dropped beams because it makes my HVAC run easier. The stair opening has got to have a double header and a double trimmer. If you don't remember what that is, go back and look at the PowerPoint, but let me just pull up. Did I have a stair opening with a double header and trimmer? No, because that stair was kind of floating out there. I guess I didn't have one on this one. But basically what that is every time there's a opening, I'll show you my Revit model. Every time there's an open, imagine this is a little microscopic spiral stair or something. On each side of it, since the joist can't go through the stair, we need to do a header. So that header takes the load from the joist and moves it over to what's called a trimmer on each side of the joist, which needs to also be doubled up because that's taking the load from whatever that opening was. Okay. Because when we have a stair, we cannot run our floor joist through the stair. There's got to be a hole in the floor. And you saw this on your Revit house. If you don't put a hole in the floor, you can't walk down the stairs. But in order to make that hole, all my joists that are running up and down, they're going to have to hit a header that goes to a double trimmer. So that's what I'm talking about with that. Let's go back to the assignment. So if you do have a flush beam for whatever reason, you need to show joist hangers at all flush connections. So this is your procedure. Determine where to locate the beams and columns and draw them in. Label the typical beams and columns on the drawing. I'm going to give you some more hints. So if my beams can span 12 feet on maximum, am I going to have my columns 14 feet apart? No, I'm not, because I'm telling you the beams can't span more than 12 feet. So my spacing between my columns is never going to be 14 feet because they can only span 12 feet. Drawing the floor joist, paying particular attention to the framing around the stair opening, label typical floor joists and double headers and trimmers. So what I'm saying is you should have a note that says typical floor joists are 2x12 SPF number 2 at 16 on center. You only have to call that out once. You don't have to have an arrow pointing to every floor joist on the typical floor joist on the whole floor. You do need to label the double headers and trimmers by the stair. Now, this is where we are going back to our footing and foundation lesson to see if you've forgotten any of it. I'm telling you the floor load. Once you get your floor framing plan all drawn, I want you to note the load carried by each column in kips next to each column. So remember that one I did for my house? I said 10.5 kips, 10.5 K right by the column because I was telling them how much load that column is taking. You're going to be doing the same thing. Now, remember when we did that first assignment on footing assignment where we figured out the tributary area of the floor and the tributary area of the beams, and we figured out 55 pounds per square foot times the area of that box, that gives us the area of the column. You're going to note every column you put on your framing plan is going to have a number on it that tells me the load that that column is taking. Okay, so I'm trying to reinforce this in a real world scenario to see how this works and to reinforce what we learned in case we need a refresher on the first weeks. I want your name and date on the drawing somewhere. but you don't have to print it out. You don't have to get your sheet all set up. Just give me the completed Revit or DWG file back into Blackboard. This is due start a class on Tuesday. Okay. And we are gonna stop class at 11:30 to have a club meeting and a club photo. Okay. Any questions? Okay, let's go to it. Thank you.